Welcome to episode 61 of the Loane Hockey Podcast, where today we're going to be talking about a mid-round draft pick of the Detroit Red Wings from the 2023 NHL draft, and that is Axel Sandin-Pellikka. And so Axel Sandin-Pellikka, he's a really intriguing prospect for the Red Wings. He's coming up through their system. Another Swedish prospect, which the Red Wings have had many prior successes with many Swedish prospects, both up front and on the back end, and obviously the main one in terms of Swedish defenseman, which is what Sandin-Pellikka plays is his position, and he's a right shot defenseman. And with Sandin-Pellikka, he showed a lot of big growth this past season in the SHL, which is a really positive sign, and really adapting to a top four role, really adapting to more ice time, adjusting to power play, adjusting to the penalty kill, adjusting to a lot of different situations that really allowed him to take over and continue to thrive. And that's a big thing when talking about his game is his he has a lot of mobility, he has a lot of range, he has a lot of puck skill. He understands a lot of different components of the game in subtle, detailed ways. And some defensemen have that ability and others don't. And Sandin-Pellikka, he's a player and a defenseman who can take control of possession when he wants to in transition. He loves to influence transitional sequences and be active off the puck, be active in terms of his routes and his movement and his patterning. And you like to see that because he's a player who's active without the puck. And anytime he's without the puck, he's looking to engage himself in the play somehow, either as a weak side D or strong side D. And so with that, that's really intriguing to talk about when it comes to his game and his development and how he can continue to get better. And I would imagine there's still AHL time needed because a lot of these Red Wings prospects have gone up through Grand Rapids and then they've come through to Detroit. So Sandin-Pellikka might be that next guy who takes that step to the AHL and makes the jump to North American ice to see how his game adapts. And he would adapt very fluidly and he plays very controlled and in a lot of small areas on a bigger ice surface. So his game would adapt a little bit more effortlessly to the AHL because especially with his defensive gaps and being able to close and being able to time his gaps and use his feet to be able to close gaps in that sense, he'd be able to adapt a little bit quicker in terms of defensively to the AHL. And in terms of his offensive play, it would also help because in terms of puck support, he's not having to go across the width of the zone to be able to support pucks, trying to support pucks endlessly. So he can rely more on spacing and be more efficient when using that spacing element to his game to be able to create not only efficiency, but at the same time being able to understand how to jump up in the play and how to engage himself in certain situations. So with Sandin-Pellikka, he's a very mobile defenseman. That's you notice about it when you watch him versus mostly his feet and how his feet move in synchronization with a lot of other body parts of his and how he can freely move his upper and lower body and separate the two, which is another really good skill to have for him because that mobility in his upper and his lower in terms of his frame and being able to separate the two really allows him to sometimes take control of games and situations and be able to be an influence in the play in different situations as well. And then you look at his offensive makeup, he's not super flashy offensive defenseman. He plays a steady two-way game. And with his offensive game, it's more reliant on puck transporting, being efficient with his puck moving, being efficient with how he's moving to support pucks without the puck. And he's not necessarily super flashy when walking the line or anything like that, but he plays very controlled with his feet. And you notice that in a lot of different situations. He plays very much in control of his feet, which allows him to dictate not only pace, but also possession, because those two elements really factor into his tempo and being able to create differentials of speed in transition off the rush in zone offensively and being able to use his feet to activate when necessary. So he plays a lot on his toes. He's very active on his feet. And I could totally see him being a guy that fast tracks to Detroit in 1, 2 years, depending on how he trends. That AHL would be a really good next step for him because he doesn't necessarily have a ton more to prove in the SHL per se. He could get an increased role and instead of point per game. That would be the only big separator for him in terms of his development in the SHL. But I've looked over his game, studied his game, watched his game, and you even look at how he played and how well he played in international tournaments and competitions. You look at him as a very intriguing potential top four defenseman in the NHL who, at minimum, a second pairing guy, and his ceiling, you don't, it's hard to really figure out what a young player's ceiling is for any player. And with him, it's more along the lines of what could he be offensively? What could he be in those situations? Be on the power play? How could he develop his game there? How could he continue to get better there? So those are elements that really factor into his decision making and elements and how he's able to sometimes link together sequences and how he can be a factor up front offensively as well.